Okay, so today we're going to be talking about some pretty interesting things. It's something I've wanted to talk about for quite a while, and I've definitely talked about it before in the past when I talk about China and Thucydides' trap and all of that stuff. And today we're going to be talking about some stories that I've been going over that are lining up in a very strange way. And it all starts with the fact that we know that the Chinese government has bioengineered the coronavirus. And that's something that the media is still not accepting. They're still not believing that that's the case. And in many cases, you're seeing them report that that's not the case. But if you like, I've talked to people who have looked at the protein sequences, and they're saying that if this occurred in nature, there is almost a 0% chance. Well, there's almost a 0% chance it could have occurred in nature. And we're seeing this spread throughout the entire world. I mean, it shut down the global economy basically because fear allowed the governments to seize more control over the people. And this created more of a dependency on government. So the governments in these particular countries are very quick to keep the people fearful. And this harms the citizenry long term, which is, of course, bad. But China knows that other countries will take the bait of the immediate gains and the money grabs while China plans long term. Because again, it aggrandizes more power to the government. So this can be inferred by the Chinese government just by looking at the place that Western culture has gotten to in their going under. And don't be confused, okay? When I talk about democracy, democracy is not the cause. Democracy is an effect of this going under. I mean, the masses never know what's good for them, and while the masses will routinely do things that harm themselves, democracy will bring nobility down with them. I mean, there's a reason that people say that democracy is like two wolves and a sheep voting on what's for dinner. The wolves will pick the sheep. But a better comparison, which I think more people can relate to because it's a little bit more obvious, is two sheep and a wolf voting on what's for dinner. The wolf needs meat, but the sheep are going to vote to graze the fields. The wolf will starve because the sheep will never let the wolf's instincts thrive. Why? Fear. So we have economies all over the globe that are devastated, including China. Don't get me wrong, this includes China. But the Western world and China are on the brink of fiat collapsing. And China is, of course, planning long term, and they're hoping that this will collapse the dollar's power. And we're seeing that the power of the dollar is the latest flashpoint in a lot of this slip in Thucydides' trap. So you have economists and stockbrokers who talk about how our economy is recovering and unemployment seems to have bottomed out, and the economy is going to recover, and we're going to see the S&P 500 go back up to where it was. We're going to see these companies like Boeing and Visa and Raytheon all get back to where they were. But we're done with normal. We're not going to get back to where we were. Why? Because governments and global organizations have created so much chaos that people want to give up their liberty for safety. People are scared of what will happen if they try to return to normal. So they've pretty much learned how you tame the beast of man. You make him sick, you make him beaten and bruised, you brainwash him to answer spiritual and moral questions with politics. So when it comes to a lot of the fallout we've seen from COVID, the US has the most to lose, especially when it comes to the disruptive nature of cryptocurrency, because it poses a severe risk to the dollar's dominance. And I'll get into this a little bit more here because I've talked about gold, of course, and that doesn't mean that gold isn't going to be a very dominating currency in the future. But we have to consider the fact that when you go to buy a loaf of bread, you're not going to sit there with your gold bar and shave off a little bit of gold. You're going to just have an electronic currency that transfers numbers to somebody else's account. It's all going to be numbers. And of course, you can have something that's gold backed, but that is not going to be the state backed currency. That's going to be the currency that's used in smaller communities, the currency that the layman chooses, that the people who are not involved in politics will tend to choose. But you're going to have state-backed currencies that are going to move in the area of crypto. And we see this when we look at the IMF white papers, when we look at the central banks white papers, and not just the US central banks, but all over the world, the central banks, where they're talking about wanting to move to a cashless world. I think the IMF called it decashing. And cryptocurrencies pose a severe risk to the dollar's dominance. The Chinese central bank is expected to release their digital yuan at some point this year. And it's a state-backed crypto that's already been distributed to over 1 billion Chinese citizens. And it's in exchange for their fiat currency. And they admit that they want this digital yuan to catch on in the US and elsewhere. So it seems as if with COVID-19, the CCP got exactly what they want. They've been getting exactly what they want throughout the whole process. So this is why I largely think that it doesn't matter when people ask if China released the virus on purpose or on accident. It doesn't really matter. They're getting exactly what they want. Governments around the world are reacting exactly as they want them to react. It shut down economies. It made people fearful and dependent. And the Fed is inflating the dollar to death. They cut interest rates to zero. They injected well over $1.5 trillion into the economy. It's probably nearing $2 trillion right now. I didn't look at the exact number, but they pumped in $1.5 trillion in one shot. Like they just went $1.5 trillion right away, and it's been billions since then. So China is already bringing up the rear with a state-backed crypto. And like I said, the IMF wants to go to a cashless world. So why is this important? Well, China is the second largest donor to the IMF. They are the second largest currency in the IMF's basket of currencies, and they have over 10% of the voting power in the IMF. And the Chinese have already developed this cryptocurrency. So they could beat out the Western world when all of the Western world's fiats inevitably crash, because the Western world is not thinking as far ahead as China. The IMF is going to be more likely to adopt or to take a larger share of the digital yuan when it's been more proven to work and to flourish, and it's in more hands, and it's already ingrained in the system more than a digital euro or a digital dollar or anything of that sort. And one thing that should play into the growing US-China tensions a little bit is that Pompeo ordered a warning to Australia on any deal that they do with China under the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative. Because if the deal adversely impacted American telecommunications, the US would be ready to disconnect from Australia. And Pompeo calls it a national security risk because of course, Australia is a Five Eyes partner. And then you have Daniel Andrews, who's a Victorian premier, who says that a strong partnership with China is in everybody in Australia's best interest. He says that it's about protecting jobs, which it's a bunch of lies. But anyways, the US is basically painting this as their main concern is Five Eyes security. It's US national security. And one thing that we do have to look at with a lot of this is the fact that on the website, which I'll put down in the description, it's not down there yet, but I'll put it down there. This is kind of an impromptu live stream, but it's shieldstrm.com. On that website, people often post very interesting things, and they post some articles that I've learned a lot from, and they post, different comments and ask different questions on things that really get me to think, and I really enjoy that. And again, that's shieldstrm.com. Go over there, sign up. It's like a networking site for our community here. I'll talk maybe a little bit more about that at the end. But anyways, somebody who was on the site, a member, and I forget the exact name. I think that her name was Kathy, but she posted a speech from a Chinese general who was in charge of crushing the Tiananmen Square protests or the riots that led to the massacre. And this general basically said that there's plenty of room for the Chinese to move into America, Canada, and Australia. And he was saying this back in, I think this speech was released, or the English version was released by the Epoch Times in 2005. And now fast forward well over a decade, and we see, I've reported one of the first stories, I think it might be the second or third video on the Right Media channel, which this is now the main channel for reasons that I've gone over plenty of times. Basically, they've restricted the Right Media channel, so I've now moved everything to this channel. But it was like the second or third video I did was on the Chinese communist invasion of Australia. And it's how the Chinese are paying people to go there and buy real estate and only rent to other Chinese people. And it's driven up the price of the housing market in, I think it was Sydney, by like 80% or something. And it's even worse now. And China's moving into Venezuela, into the arable lands of Venezuela. They're in Canada, they're in America. And so we're seeing a lot of this come to fruition. And so that alone bolsters a bit of what was in this speech. And it's a very interesting speech. I did post it on the website. Again, that's shieldstrm.com. And you can go over there, sign up, check out everything. It's very cool. So with Thucydides' trap, we have to recognize that it's usually a third party that draws in the two rival powers that we're talking about with Thucydides' trap, where you have two powers, one is dominating the other, and then one overtakes the other. And when that slip happens, there's going to be conflict. Well, it's not inevitable. There's going to be conflict if the goals of the powers are very disparate. And I mean, way more often than not, the goals are very disparate. And we have to take that into consideration, especially with the US and China, that there are goals that are completely opposed to one another. So ending this without conflict, I'm seeing it as an impossibility. So who could be that third party that draws these two rival powers of the US and China into a conflict? Well, there's an India-China standoff at India's border, and Trump is offering to mediate the negotiations. So China and India are Asia's two main military powers. And although there have been no deaths in that dispute, the very recent dispute yet, China is upping their military preparedness, and the Indian government has reported over 1,000 minor incursions between 2016 and 2018, and now it's starting back up. And again, there have been no deaths in this very recent spur up of tensions, but it doesn't mean that it's not escalating. I mean, we look at India, who's an ally of the US, and we look at China, who's an enemy of the US, and like militarily speaking. And it just seems like that could be the third party that draws China and the US into a severe military conflict. And one thing that I do want to address is the argument of inflation versus deflation really quick right here. And I've addressed this in a previous video, but I just want to cover it again. So people talk about inflation versus deflation, and they're saying that we're seeing deflation right now in the economy. And that's just, it's the way that things are going. Prices are getting lower for certain things, especially we're seeing it with oil, but we're seeing it in some areas with food, and then in other areas we're seeing inflation with food. And this is all around the globe. We're seeing this inflation versus deflation. And the thing to really consider, which I have addressed before, but I'll just address again here, is that you have the Fed pumping in a ton of money. And the reason that we're seeing deflation is only because the velocity of money, the rate at which people are spending money, is going down. And so when you look at supply and demand, you're seeing that the supply is there, but the demand has dropped off largely. And so you have to consider the inflationary versus the deflationary factors. And so when you look at the supply of the money, that's gone through the roof. But when you look at the velocity of the money, the velocity of the spending, how fast people are spending the money, that's decreased. And so when that overpowers the oversaturation of money in the economy, you're going to see deflation. But then as the economy starts to pick up a little bit, you're going to see that flip, and we're going to get severe inflation. And regardless, the point is that we're pumping in a ton of volume to the fiat currency. And so it's making the dollar more and more worthless. So basically, if you see your dollar gaining value right now, it's only gaining value because other people are not spending their money as fast. So once that starts to pick up again, the dollar is going to lose a tremendous amount of value. And the same thing is going to happen with fiat currencies all around the globe. And the Chinese government is planning really long term. They know all fiat currencies are going to tend to their actual value, which is the worth of the paper that they're printed on. So we'll have to see where a lot of this goes. And I could expand on a lot more of this, but I'm going to save it for future videos. I don't want to make this too dense right now. I'm going to cover this topic more, of course, and I've already done that. This is not the first installment of me talking about this topic. But just to summarize a lot of what I've covered here. So COVID has tanked the global economies, or the global economy, but very specifically Western economies. And you have fiat currencies all over the world that are falling, but the Chinese are the most well-equipped to institute a state-backed crypto, which coincides with the plans of China, the Made in China 2025. It coincides with the IMF decashing. It coincides with central banks wanting to go to a cashless world for the purpose of inflating to the moon. And this all plays into Thucydides' trap between the US and China. And keep in mind, we also have to watch the conflict between India and China, because it's an interesting flashpoint, and we'll have to keep an eye on it. But currency dominance will be the largest and most likely flashpoint here with Thucydides' trap. So that's all that I really want to cover. I thank you guys so much for watching. Again, go over to the website. It's shieldtrm.com. And go over there. You can sign up on the site. It's free to sign up, completely free. You can network and interact with other people. It's a place for our community. It's a place for people who are inquisitive and eager to learn and to discover the truth of a lot of this. And it's a place for our community to flourish. And that's why I started the website. And we're doing really well right now. We have over 300 members. And I encourage everybody to go over there and sign up, because people are not being notified when I post on the channel. People are not being notified or even seeing my tweets on Twitter. And it's a place for all of that. You can get notified without a doubt every single time that I post. I post plenty over there that I don't post on the channel. I post pretty much every single day. I don't think I posted yesterday, but I post pretty much every day. And so there's a lot of content over there that you're not going to see on the channel. And like I said, people post interesting news articles. They post interesting videos. They have interesting questions and comments. And it helps me out, because it's like we're crowdsourcing a lot of this truth. We're crowdsourcing a lot of the stories. And I really appreciate that. And again, I'll put it down in the description, but it's shieldstrm.com. You can go over there, sign up. It's free. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. I really, really appreciate it. And I'll see you guys in the next one.